If you think a starving serf armed with nothing but a broken body cannot terrify knights, watch what 10 trillion nanomachines do to Luo Lan. The boy everyone expected to freeze in a bandit cave had already died once on Earth and once in a nuclear wasteland. By the time this world understood what was hiding in his blood, Luo Lan had already broken the limits reserved for noble monsters. Above him was a low, damp cave ceiling covered in frost. The air smelled of sweat mold and blood. The bombs screamed down from the sky in his memories, followed by a blinding white flash and a deafening roar. A little black box had been sitting safely inside the storage space hidden in his mind. The first time Luo Lan transmigrated, he went from peaceful Earth to becoming the third son of a factory worker in a nuclear wasteland. Staying alive there had been difficult, even though his family lived slightly better than most. One brother died in an accident while the other disappeared to sickness before reaching adulthood. His storage space was nothing like the enormous worlds described in fantasy stories. Anything placed inside could not be detected, and Luo Lan could apply enough force within the space to crack objects open. That ability turned him into a smuggler carrying precision parts, data drives, and secret documents. Metal was the currency of survival because enough of it could buy entry into a protected base city. Luo Lan believed his final delivery would earn the last amount he needed to become a real citizen. Instead, the mysterious cargo brought bombs down on an entire train station and ended his second life. Now the memories of another body entered his mind in broken pieces. This body had been forced to haul water, chop wood, carry logs, and serve mountain bandits day and night. Winter cold, constant hunger, brutal labor, and repeated whippings had hollowed the young serf out completely. After collapsing in the snow, the original boy had been kicked and dragged back into the cave. He never woke again because Luo Lan opened those eyes instead. Most of the surrounding serfs were skin and bones with eyes as empty as those of walking corpses. Luo Lan's new body was barely 5 feet tall with limbs like sticks and a stomach roaring from hunger. Merely standing required almost every drop of strength he possessed. Then Luo Lan discovered the tiny storage space was still inside his mind. Better yet, the black box from Water Blue Star had crossed worlds with him. In his smuggling days, Luo Lan survived by never questioning cargo and never opening a client's package. Those rules had died with the train station. Whatever the box contained had apparently been important enough for someone to destroy hundreds of lives. Luo Lan was already trapped in a bandit den and close to death, so caution had lost most of its value. The unknown could kill him, but the known future promised starvation and freezing. He pressed into the deepest corner of the cave while the guards remained beyond the wooden fence. With one thought, the black box appeared in his palm. Its unknown alloy felt icy smooth and completely seamless. Special equipment should have been required to open something so carefully protected. Fortunately, Luo Lan's storage space had already created several fractures in the shell. His frozen fingers twisted against those cracks until the lid finally popped open. Moonlight slipped through the cave and revealed a tiny transparent syringe. Silver-white liquid gleamed inside like living metal. Countless points of light drifted through the fluid so slowly that Luo Lan almost mistook them for reflections. This tiny syringe was apparently the treasure that had gotten him killed. Even the rarest medical injection should not have justified bombing an entire station. More than 10 years in a wasteland had taught Luo Lan that desperate men sometimes survived by choosing the dangerous option. He removed the metal cap and exposed the thin needle. The syringe entered his bony arm before hesitation could change his decision. Silver liquid flowed into his blood without pain. A cool sensation spread through every vein like tiny insects crawling beneath his skin. Then, a mechanical voice announced the activation of Space Research Institute Model 0 First Edition Nanomachines. Symbiosis with the host began immediately. Warmth flooded Luo Lan's entire body from somewhere deeper than his muscles. His awareness sharpened until he could perceive activity inside his own blood. Silver specks smaller than dust moved through his veins like an army following perfect orders. Wherever they passed, the deadly cold retreated. The number delivered by Model 0 almost stopped Luo Lan's thoughts. 10 trillion nanomachines were now living inside him. Model 0 detected abnormal life signs and multiple tissue injuries. Full body repair mode activated. Trillions of machines gathered around torn muscle fibers and began rebuilding damaged tissue with terrifying precision. They broke down the last scraps of food in his empty stomach and redirected every available nutrient. Beneath, frostbitten skin cell growth accelerated. Open wounds closed before Luo Lan's eyes. Scabs formed, dead skin peeled away, and smooth new flesh appeared underneath. The warmth drove winter from his bones. Shriveled limbs slowly regained strength while his painful hunger became strangely quiet. His breathing changed from shallow gasps to deep, steady breaths. A body that had been moments from death was returning to life at an impossible speed. Model Zero fed information directly into Luolan's brain as the repairs continued. These nanomachines were a top-secret biological-mechanical symbiote from Water Blue Star's Space Research Institute. Their core functions included medical repair, organ failure, reversal lifespan extension, and physical enhancement. Each machine was only 50 nanometers in its normal state. They could hide inside blood, muscle, bone, and even nerve endings. Glucose, fat, and kinetic energy from movement supplied their power. They could scan information, transmit data, and copy text or images from books. Within 10 meters, Model Zero could create three-dimensional maps of buildings or living skeletons. Within 100 meters, heat sources and metal objects could also be detected. Their combat functions were even more frightening. Nanomachines could monitor an enemy's movements and send predictive signals to Luolan's brain before an attack landed. Every muscle could be directed toward an optimized angle and level of force. Ordinary cuts and impacts could be closed almost instantly. Severe blood loss, or missing body parts, still required time, because real cells had to divide and rebuild. Model Zero could also stabilize failing organs and strengthen Luolan beyond an ordinary healthy adult. Technology like this had existed only in science fiction during his first life. Water Blue Star had apparently turned that fantasy into a weapon hidden inside a syringe. The most shocking function was lifespan extension. True immortality remained impossible because human cells could divide only a limited number of times. Even so, Model Zero estimated that a human body could survive for 150 to 200 years. Luolan finally understood why someone might order a bombing for this technology. A creation capable of changing medicine, warfare, and human lifespan could throw entire nations into chaos. But the treasure no longer belonged to Water Blue Star. It belonged to him. Luolan raised his hand into the moonlight and studied the skin that had been covered in frostbite. Not a single scar remained. Joy struck so violently that he bit his lip to keep from laughing inside the prison cave. 10 trillion nanomachines were more than a lifeline. They were the greatest hidden card Luolan had ever possessed. Starvation beatings and the bandits suddenly looked less like an unavoidable death sentence. Luolan forced his emotions under control and checked the internal data display. Multiple muscle injuries were still being repaired and widespread frostbite remained. Developmental stunting had also damaged the body after years of poor nutrition. His overall physical capacity was only a fraction of a healthy modern adult man's. Model Zero needed time, nutrients, and energy. This body simply lacked enough fuel for immediate transformation. Luolan began sorting through the dead boy's memories while the nanomachines rebuilt him. The world resembled medieval Europe, with serfs, commoners, knights, nobles, farmland, and violent territorial lords. Yet one detail felt strangely wrong. None of Luolan's inherited memories mentioned gods, churches, or organized religion. A Western medieval society had developed without the religious structures he expected to see. The mystery was interesting, but surviving the bandits came first. By dawn, Model Zero had dragged Luolan's body out of immediate danger. His physical rating had risen to roughly half that of a healthy modern adult. The nanomachines could have done more if his body contained enough energy. Food was the greatest limitation. With sufficient nutrition, Model Zero could reshape muscle, bone, and hormonal functions at extraordinary speed. In the bandit camp, each serf received little more than gritty black bread and dirty water. Even without the winter cold, those conditions would eventually kill everyone. Luolan needed an escape. A wooden club suddenly cracked across a serf's back at the cave entrance. The other prisoners jerked awake as a scarred bandit ordered them to work. A long mark ran from the man's eyebrow to his jaw. Luolan remembered him as Scarface, the cruelest guard in the hideout. Scarface had once chopped off a serf's leg and left the victim outside to freeze. Many of the injuries Model Zero was repairing had also come from this man. The serfs dragged themselves upright and collected rusty axes and frayed ropes. Nobody complained because the bandits had beaten fear deeper than hunger. Luolan lowered his head and copied their exhausted movements. As he passed Scarface, Model Zero quietly scanned the bandit's body. Scarface's physical rating was only 0.8. Luolan had expected a violent adult warrior to be considerably stronger. Then he remembered that Model Zero's standard adult had grown up with modern nutrition and medicine. These medieval humans were often smaller and weaker because their bodies had been starved since childhood. That comparison made escape appear much more realistic. Snow fell heavily outside while the surviving serfs divided a tiny pot of watery porridge. 10 people shared food Luo Lan would once have considered animal slop. He ate every mouthful gratefully. Former prisoners had fought over meals until the bandits began killing anyone who started trouble. Now most of the serfs lacked enough energy even to argue. The day's labor included chopping wood, hauling water, shoveling snow, and moving rocks. Luo Lan swung a dull axe while Model Zero squeezed every fragment of energy from his meal. His chest was heaving after only minutes of work. The nanomachines could optimize a body, but they could not create energy from nothing. Luo Lan reduced his situation to 4 priorities: survive, heal, grow stronger, and gather information. 3 more days passed beneath the bandit's careless eyes. His physical rating rose to 0.7. Luo Lan still looked like a skinny, dark-skinned boy, but his real strength was approaching Scarface's. During every chore, Model Zero quietly scanned the camp. 14 bandits belonged to the group, although some lookouts were stationed away from the hideout. Their straw-haired leader was named Karen. Karen's physical rating reached 1.2, making him significantly stronger than Scarface. Most of the others remained below 1. The bandits believed the mountains themselves served as prison walls. Any starving serf who escaped would still face wolves, tigers, boars, and winter. Luo Lan refused to trade captivity for a blind gamble in the wilderness. His body kept improving while he waited. Model Zero could accelerate reactions, close wounds, and predict enemy attacks from muscle movements. A normal fighter might fall after 1 clean blade strike. Luo Lan could survive injuries long enough for the nanomachines to repair them. More importantly, he could begin moving before an opponent's weapon completed its attack. Fighting his way out slowly became more attractive than running. 14 against 1 looked impossible only if all 14 attacked together. At most, 3 or 4 bandits guarded the serfs at one time. The captors had never considered half-dead workers capable of rebellion. Their greatest mistake was failing to include Model Zero in their calculations. Luo Lan decided that patience would turn the bandits' arrogance into his opportunity. On the 9th night approaching, hoofbeats suddenly shattered that careful plan. Luo Lan's physical rating had climbed close to that of a healthy adult. His arms were filling with muscle, and his body had begun growing taller. The changes happened gradually enough that the bandits noticed nothing. He estimated this young body could reach roughly 1.3 before its current natural development became a limitation. Combined with nanomachine combat assistance, that level was more than enough for ordinary bandits. Luo Lan had been imagining what proper food could eventually do when his ears detected horses. The bandit camp owned no horses. A heartbeat later, screams and colliding weapons erupted through the night. Someone was attacking the hideout. Luo Lan did not care who they were because chaos had finally opened the prison door. He seized a dull axe and smashed it into the wooden fence covering the cave entrance. The weakened planks almost collapsed after the first blow. Luo Lan called for anyone who still wanted to live to move immediately. His decision gave the other prisoners the courage they had been unable to find alone. 8 surviving serfs attacked the barrier with axes and work tools. The fence broke apart. Luo Lan rushed outside first and saw trained soldiers arranged in a tight spear formation. Cold spearheads reflected moonlight around a mounted man. The battle between soldiers and bandits was brutally one-sided. Bandits fell after only a few exchanges while the spear formation remained almost untouched. Luo Lan immediately suspected a manor lord had personally entered the mountains. Then Scarface and Karen came running directly toward him. Both bandits had slipped away from the soldiers and were desperate to reach the forest. Luo Lan stepped into their escape path. Scarface recognized the skinny serf and swung a curved blade at his head. Model Zero read the bandit's muscles before the weapon reached full speed. Luo Lan shifted aside like a cat and allowed the edge to whistle past his face. His fist slammed into Scarface's jaw. Blood and broken teeth sprayed across the snow. Scarface's hand opened from the pain and his blade dropped. Luo Lan snatched the curved weapon before it touched the ground. One fast strike finished the man who had tortured this body for weeks. Karen had barely processed Scarface's death when Luo Lan's stolen blade entered his stomach. Luo Lan twisted the weapon and sent the bandit leader unconscious from pain. Every movement had been deliberately calculated. The damaged axe was too slow, so Luo Lan disarmed Scarface first and used the lighter sword on both enemies. 2 bandits went down without landing a single attack. Luo Lan shook blood from the blade and turned toward the soldiers. The larger battle was already over. Surviving bandits were either kneeling in the snow or pinned by spear points. Luo Lan immediately dropped to one knee with the rescued serfs. The dead boy's memories had taught him never to offend a noble, not even accidentally. The mounted knight identified Karen's group as deserters from Lioli River. He dismounted and approached the wounded bandit leader. One enormous sword stroke removed Karen's head. Luolan's attention locked onto the knight's weapon. The one-handed sword looked almost twice the size of anything a normal fighter should comfortably use. It weighed around 4 kilograms, yet the knight handled it as though it were ordinary steel. Model 0 scanned the man. The result was a physical rating of 4.1. Luolan's mind almost went blank. He had imagined that 3 times normal strength would make him a small superhuman. This knight had casually crossed 4. Stories from the original Luolan's father suddenly sounded far less exaggerated. People claimed the Manor Lord could face 100 ordinary men. Luolan had once assumed equipment a warhorse, and noble training explained those legends. Model 0 proved the knight's body itself was genuinely far beyond ordinary humanity. That realization crushed Luolan's early confidence. 10 trillion nanomachines no longer made him feel untouchable. The world might resemble medieval Europe on the surface, but something beneath its power structure was deeply abnormal. Luolan began considering battle energy magic or an unknown biological system. The knight ordered every remaining bandit executed. His soldiers obeyed without hesitation. When the final blade stopped moving, the knight wiped his sword and turned toward the rescued serfs. His eyes stopped on Luolan. Model 0 immediately entered alert mode. Luolan lowered his body and deliberately allowed a slight tremble into his voice. He gave his name and behaved exactly as a frightened serf should. The knight asked whether Luolan had defeated Scarface and Karen. Luolan answered without bragging. Surprise briefly entered the knight's eyes. A skinny 15-year-old serf had apparently defeated 2 bandits without receiving a wound. Even trained soldiers would have struggled to reproduce that result. The knight ordered Luolan to stand. His name was Knight Hand, and the captured serfs belonged to his manor. He promised to return everyone home. Then Knight Hand instructed his squire Lore to prepare Luolan's freedom document. The other serfs could not hide their shock. Luolan had entered the cave as property and was leaving as a free citizen. Knight Hand considered it wasteful to send a talented fighter back to farmland. The Viscount had recently conquered Lioli River territory and needed more soldiers. Luolan was ordered to report to the town barracks. Envy spread among the rescued farmers. Serfdom was not exactly slavery, but endless labor and heavy taxes made the difference painfully narrow. Buying freedom normally required money an ordinary farmer could never collect. Luolan had received freedom because a noble personally noticed his combat ability. Joining the standing army was an even greater opportunity. Only free citizens could serve in Grey Valley's permanent forces. A soldier received weapons, food, shelter, and training from his lord. 3 daily meals of black bread sounded luxurious to people who regularly went hungry. War remained dangerous, but serfs were dragged into noble conflicts anyway. Becoming a professional soldier therefore lifted a commoner into an entirely different social position. Some farmers already imagined Luolan becoming a squire. A few regretted not rushing from the cave first and attracting Knight Hand's attention. Deep down, they knew Scarface and Karen would have killed them. Knight Hand's soldiers searched the hideout and discovered coins and food. The knight distributed the captured money among his men. Luolan received several copper coins for his role in bringing down Karen. Copper, silver, and gold formed the 3 main levels of currency. 100 coins of a lower level equaled 1 coin of the next. The soldiers rested while the rescued serfs cooked the bandits' supplies. Because Luolan was entering the army, the veterans began treating him more like a future comrade. He welcomed that change because soldiers knew far more about the world than isolated farmers. 2 copper coins and careful conversation soon earned the attention of a veteran named Nakin. Luolan used Knight Hand's monstrous strength to guide the conversation where he wanted it. Nakin proudly explained that Hand was only a low knight. Viscount Rot was supposedly stronger and had reached mid-knight rank. According to the veteran, Rot could cut through a steel plate several fingers thick with 1 sword strike. High knights were even more absurd. Stories claimed they could throw stone blocks weighing hundreds of pounds and catch them like toys. Luolan realized this world's strongest humans were operating far beyond natural limits. Nakin also described Grey Valley's political situation. The territory belonged to the Purple Thorn Kingdom and bordered other kingdoms such as Black Moon and Guaishuan. 3 months earlier, the Rot family had fought the Norton family for control of Lioli River. The Rot family won and absorbed the conquered territory. A political marriage helped seal their claim. Their combined lands now covered thousands of square kilometers. More territory meant more wealth, more borders, and a greater need for soldiers. The Rot family wanted roughly 1,000 standing troops. Karen had once been a Norton family squire. When his former masters lost, he escaped and became a bandit. His attacks against Night Hand's property had been driven by hatred and desperation. The bandits also frightened away an expensive warhorse during one raid. That loss was why Night Hand personally entered the mountains. Luolan eventually asked the question that mattered most. He wanted to know why nobles and knights were so physically powerful. Nakin revealed the existence of something called the breathing method. Luolan's heartbeat accelerated immediately. Memories of fantasy novels filled his mind with battle energy sword waves and supernatural shields. He carefully asked whether knights could release energy through their blades. Nakin laughed at the idea. Traveling poets invented stories about warriors cutting distant enemies with air. Real knights, Nakin insisted, could do nothing so mystical. If Viscount Rot could split castles with sword energy, he would not need an army. The answer made the mystery even more interesting. Knights possessed pure physical power without visible magic. Their bodies had somehow been pushed beyond human limitations. Luolan asked whether commoners could learn the breathing method. Nakin's expression immediately became serious. Noble blood was supposedly required. Commoners were forbidden even to touch such techniques. One merchant had allegedly tried to purchase a breathing method from an impoverished knight. His entire family was hanged after the local lord discovered the transaction. Nakin warned Luolan not to reach for power reserved for nobles. There was only one accepted path upward. An excellent soldier might become a noble's squire. A successful squire could receive a family name and marry into a lesser noble bloodline. His children might then be allowed to practice breathing techniques. Night Hand's own family had supposedly risen through that process. His grandfather began as an ordinary soldier who saved a noble on the battlefield. Generations later, Hand had become a true knight, commanding 100 men. Luolan quietly understood the system. Blood-breathing methods and noble lineage supported the entire hierarchy. Commoners did not even possess surnames. To rise, they served, fought, attracted attention, and hoped their descendants inherited opportunities denied to them. Yet Luolan refused to accept the noble blood explanation without evidence. He silently ordered Model Zero to scan lore. Night Hand's squire had noble ancestry and already practiced a family breathing method. Within seconds, Model Zero completed a three-dimensional biological model. Lore possessed no special organs or hidden physiological structures. Nobles and commoners were the same species. Beyond muscular development, their bodies were fundamentally identical. The claim that noble blood alone enabled breathing methods suddenly looked like a lie. Luolan still needed to observe the actual technique before reaching a final conclusion. Getting caught spying on noble training could earn him an immediate death sentence. Model Zero offered a way around that danger. If Luolan remained within 10 meters of a practitioner, the nanomachines could scan every physical process. He might steal an entire breathing technique without touching a manual. Luolan set himself a new goal. He would discover what the breathing method really was and test whether commoners could use it. At dawn, the soldiers prepared to leave the mountain camp. Cold wind drove snow through the pine forest while Nakin kicked sleeping men awake. The rescued serfs moved slowly, still protecting their last pieces of black bread. Compared with the cave, even marching through winter felt like freedom. Luolan helped pack supplies while repeatedly watching lore. The squire's resting breathing pattern was unusually slow and controlled. Model Zero recorded every inhale and chest movement. Unfortunately, observing lore at rest revealed nothing decisive. The breathing method clearly required more than simply breathing slowly. Scanning Night Hand directly was too dangerous. Hand had shown interest in Luolan, but nobles did not treat social boundaries lightly. One suspicious movement could still end with a sword through the former serf's neck. The group descended narrow mountain trails and reached a village by evening. Militia guards recognized Night Hand's banner and welcomed the soldiers. Relief among the rescued farmers quickly turned into anxiety. They worried about stolen tools, abandoned homes, crops, and children left behind for more than a month. Luolan remained apart from those conversations. He washed beside a village well and studied his reflection. Black hair, dark eyes, and thin features looked surprisingly similar to his previous lives. The following afternoon, everyone arrived at Night Hand's manor. Wooden fences surrounded serf cottages, a blacksmith shop, and the central manor house. Hand rarely lived there because a steward handled daily affairs. Before leaving, the knight officially removed Luolan's serf status. He also ordered assistance for the rescued farmers. Then Night Hand and Lore rode toward the Rot family estate. The manor's new steward was a friendly-looking middle-aged man called Old Keela. His predecessor had been hanged for losing the valuable warhorse. Old Keela announced that rescued farmers would receive grain and temporary exemption from labor duties. Cheers spread across the manor grounds. When the others left, old Keela personally approached Luo Lan. He offered the boy a place in his own mud brick house rather than a surf shack. 2 clean sets of linen clothes and new cloth shoes were also waiting. Old Keela claimed friendship with Luo Lan's late father. The inherited memories told a different story. Luo Lan's father and old Keela had barely known each other. The steward was making an investment, not repaying an emotional debt. He believed Luo Lan might become a squire or eventually create a knightly family. A few clothes and a chicken dinner were a cheap price for future goodwill. Luo Lan recognized the calculation and felt no resentment. A warm bed, clean clothes, and real meat were useful regardless of old Keela's motives. It became the most comfortable night Luo Lan had experienced since entering this world. The next morning, a farmer's cart carried him toward Grey Rock Town. The barracks stood on a gentle slope west of the settlement. Gray-black stone moss-covered walls and smoke-darkened beams made the complex resemble an old iron beast. A low wall separated training grounds, an armory, and living quarters. Dozens of young men were already gathered when Luo Lan arrived. They were sons of free citizens selected for military service. Some wore patched clothes, some carried inherited swords, and others possessed nothing but black bread. Fear and hope mixed in almost every face. Roughly 100 recruits would be trained by 10 veterans under a single centurion. A massive veteran named Gray addressed them first. The blacksmith's son stood over 6 feet tall and looked like a human wall. Gray reminded the recruits that the Viscount would feed and equip them. In return, they would train for hours, stand winter guard, hunt bandits, and enter wars. Arms, legs, and lives might be lost. Anyone unwilling to accept that price could leave immediately. Model Zero scanned Gray while he shouted. His physical rating reached 1.8, despite never practicing a breathing method. Natural talent and years of brutal work had created a warrior who would have been legendary in many ancient armies. Here, Gray remained a common veteran. The centurion outranked him because noble birth granted access to breathing methods. Luo Lan began comparing the physical numbers. A healthy modern adult represented a rating of 1. Exceptional ancient warriors might approach 2 or slightly higher through natural training. The absolute natural human limit appeared close to 3. Knights broke through that ceiling in strength, endurance, toughness, and speed at the same time. Their reactions, however, did not seem equally supernatural. That weakness was exactly where Model Zero gave Luo Lan an advantage. In combat mode, nanomachines monitored muscular contractions before visible attacks fully formed. Signals reached Luo Lan's brain quickly enough for his body to begin dodging almost immediately. The system could even predict a firearm attack by observing the trigger movement before the bullet left. Combat mode consumed enormous energy because human nerves were being pushed unnaturally hard. Still, biology and machinery together gave Luo Lan reactions no ordinary knight possessed. Gray demanded an answer from the recruits. 100 voices roared their willingness to serve. The veteran knew most had joined for food rather than honor. Ideals meant little to starving people until someone filled their stomachs. Screening began with a run across the training yard. Recruits tripped through mud while veterans shouted at anyone who remained on the ground. One boy cut his knee badly and continued running without complaint. Several recruits who lacked endurance or courage were removed. The survivors received gray uniforms and used leather armor. Some pieces still carried dried blood from previous owners. The recruits were warned to clean and protect their equipment. After dressing, they gathered beneath the Lord's banner. Gray led an oath of loyalty, obedience, and defense of Gray Valley until death. Many recruits stumbled over the words because most commoners could not read. The company was divided into groups under veteran instructors. Luo Lan's quarters contained wooden sleeping planks covered in straw. 4 men shared a cramped room and a small cabinet. A scarred veteran named Jack explained the barracks rules. The dawn bugle was absolute. Being late meant running laps, and neglected equipment invited punishment. A recruit nervously asked about the blood on his armor. Jack only promised that he would understand soon enough. That evening, Luo Lan received thick pea soup, salted meat, and black bread. The recruits ate as though the barracks had served a royal feast. For many of them, it was the best food they had ever received. Luo Lan cared about the meal for another reason. Proper food meant energy for Model Zero. Energy meant rapid physical growth. While the other boys formed friendships, Luo Lan concentrated on eating and strengthening his body. One mystery remained because the centurion had not yet appeared. Training began hard and remained relentless. Every dawn, Gray waited in the fog like an iron tower. Formation work was followed by a 1-kilometer run. Luo Lan deliberately remained near the middle or upper section of the group. Model Zero optimized his breathing and stride so efficiently that winning would have been easy. Standing out too much offered no benefit. After running came spear drills. The beechwood weapons were several meters long and tipped with iron. Most recruits struggled with the weight after hours of repetition. Veterans corrected bad form with wooden sticks. Luolan learned differently. Model Zero scanned every proper movement and transmitted the optimized pattern into his brain. Each thrust and stance became almost textbook perfect. Jack soon used Luolan as an example for the other recruits. Afternoon sessions added strength work and formation training. 10-man groups practiced advancing, turning, and attacking in coordinated lines. Night watches and patrols gradually became part of their routine. Months passed and winter turned into spring. Steady food and constant training improved every surviving recruit. Most physical ratings climbed close to 0.8. Luolan quietly reached 1.7. Only Gray's naturally massive body remained stronger among the ordinary soldiers. Model Zero was not merely helping Luolan exercise. The nanomachines were rebuilding years of malnutrition and reinforcing his body at a cellular level. Luolan also grew several inches in only a few months. Once the recruits developed competent spear formations, sword and short blade lessons began. Spears remained the true backbone of battlefield armies. Several dozen disciplined spearmen could threaten even a low knight in a direct formation fight. The problem came when two spear lines collided and their shafts tangled together. At close distance, long weapons became clumsy. Soldiers then dropped spears and drew short blades. Some armies used armored greatsword fighters to enter that chaos. Full-plate armor, however, was unbelievably expensive. Luolan doubted this world's smithing technology had fully developed such equipment. Knight Hand himself had worn chainmail. Against mid-knights capable of cutting thick steel, ordinary armor might not matter anyway. High knights were even rarer and could influence an entire kingdom. The recruits practiced with wooden swords and knives. Veterans demonstrated short chops, blocks, thrusts, and grappling. Nothing looked elegant. Every technique was designed for crowded, ugly, close-range killing. While training, Luolan noticed a new figure in black leather armor. Gray immediately approached the newcomer with unusual respect. The man was Centurion Raiden. Raiden was a knight's son and commander of the 100-man company. It was the first time Luolan had seen him since entering the barracks. After speaking with Gray, Raiden moved beneath an old oak tree. He closed his eyes despite the noise of wooden weapons and shouting recruits. Luolan watched from approximately 10 meters away. Raiden's breathing changed. Slow, deliberate inhales filled his chest before the movement seemed to sink lower through his torso. His entire body followed a hidden rhythm. Raiden was practicing a breathing method. Luolan silently ordered Model Zero to scan everything. A real-time biological model formed immediately. Luolan could barely believe his luck. He had expected years of service before approaching a noble technique. Raiden had brought the secret directly into the noisy training yard. Luolan continued sparring while his true attention remained on the Centurion. Model Zero measured Raiden's physical rating at 2.8. He stood close to the natural human ceiling, but had not broken through it. Crossing that wall separated true knights from excellent ordinary fighters. Only some of Gray Valley's Centurions had reached knight rank. Most breathing method practitioners never succeeded. This world's test for knighthood relied on visible feats of raw strength. A candidate had to lift a massive stone overhead and repeatedly swing an enormous sword. Passing suggested a physical rating close to 4. Raiden remained well below that mark. Luolan understood why the Centurion neglected the barracks for months at a time. Training common soldiers mattered less to Raiden than his dream of becoming a knight. Practicing beneath the oak amid constant noise probably served as mental discipline. If Raiden could focus through chaos, his concentration might survive a real battlefield. That night, Luolan studied everything Model Zero had recorded. The breathing method's basic mechanism was surprisingly practical. Controlled breathing altered hormonal regulation and digestive efficiency. The practitioner's body absorbed nutrients more effectively. Physical training then converted those resources into stronger muscle and tissue. A mental component also resembled meditation or self-hypnosis. Practitioners imagined warmth flowing through their muscles and nourishing the body. No visible magical energy existed. The mind was influencing biological functions. Luolan also understood why random commoners could not easily reproduce the technique. A written manual would be almost useless to an illiterate farmer. The process required personal guidance and careful correction. Model Zero removed that obstacle. Nanomachines had scanned the entire process and could direct Luolan's body more accurately than any teacher. Yet a contradiction remained. Model Zero already controlled hormones and digestion better than the breathing method. Safe nanomachine enhancement seemed capable of pushing Luolan to a physical rating near 5. Going much further risked unnatural damage or mechanical replacement of biological structures. First edition nanomachines were not designed to transform him into a machine. High Knights still reached physical ratings around 12. Simple nutrition and hormone optimization could not explain that difference. Something else was hiding inside the breathing method. Luolan needed more data and personal experimentation. Unfortunately, a commoner caught practicing noble breathing techniques would be executed. New recruits also had no privacy. Nearly every hour belonged to training guard duty or chores. Veterans enjoyed more personal freedom. Proven soldiers could visit town help farms or spend 1 or 2 hours alone. Luolan decided he needed veteran status. Skill would not be the difficult part. Model Zero had already made him better than many experienced soldiers. Trust was harder. Military organizations valued reliable loyalty more than unexplained talent. Luolan therefore began building a reputation with extreme care. He performed excellently without appearing superhuman. 1 step ahead looked like genius. 100 steps ahead looked like a monster. Luolan knew nobles would dissect his secrets if they understood what lived inside his blood. He deliberately slowed spear thrusts and kept reserve strength during races. In sparring, he allowed opponents enough room to believe they had a chance. Even restrained Luolan attracted attention. Veterans predicted that he might someday rival Gray. Nighthand's personal recommendation made his talent appear believable. Luolan also arrived early for every guard shift. After training, he polished veteran armor and sharpened weapons. He delivered messages without forgetting details or demanding rewards. Younger soldiers received practical training advice based on Model Zero's analysis. Luolan presented those corrections as tricks he had discovered through experience. Recruits respected his willingness to help. Veterans appreciated a talented soldier who did not hoard knowledge. When men complained about taxes or harsh training, Luolan listened without becoming an informer. He quietly warned them to keep dangerous opinions away from officers. 3 lifetimes had taught Luolan that people trusted reliability more than brilliance. Within 2 months, the entire barracks considered him dependable. Gray personally recommended his promotion. Raiden approved without hesitation. Luolan had Nighthand's recognition, confirmed combat kills, excellent skills, and a strong reputation. 6 months after enlisting, Gray announced his veteran status before the company. Luolan received thicker leather armor and moved into veteran quarters. A small private chest became his first real personal storage outside Model Zero's space. More importantly, he finally gained 1 or 2 hours of private time each day. That night, Luolan reopened months of data collected from Raiden's training. Breathing curves, muscle maps, and movement patterns filled his awareness. One tiny anomaly finally appeared. Whenever Raiden's breathing and sword movement entered a specific ratio, his physical rating increased by roughly 0.01. The change was so small that ordinary observation could never notice it. Model Zero had recorded the phenomenon twice. Luolan realized this was the missing secret. Breathing methods did more than regulate hormones and digestion. A precise frequency triggered an unknown physical response. Tiny increases accumulated through years of practice until a body crossed the natural ceiling. Luolan needed to test the process on himself. The next day he told Jack he was leaving the barracks during his free time. Jack assumed the newly promoted veteran wanted to visit a tavern. Luolan instead entered a deserted forest. In a flat clearing, he ordered Model Zero to reproduce Raiden's breathing and sword frequency exactly. Slow inhalation accompanied the rising sword. A long exhalation followed the downward slash. Every movement matched Raiden's practice with mechanical precision. 15 minutes passed without any change. Luolan quickly understood the problem. Different bodies required different frequencies. Raiden's exact rhythm might never trigger the same response in Luolan. Model Zero began adjusting the pattern in tiny increments. Sword cuts echoed through the trees as breathing and movement shifted again and again. 10 minutes later, the frequency reached 1.2 Hz. Luolan felt a faint change like dry earth touching its first rain. Model Zero detected unknown radiation particles entering the host body. His physical rating increased by 0.01. The particles produced minor improvements in constitution and resilience without immediate side effects. Luolan's eyes brightened. Radiation was the hidden answer. Something in the atmosphere, ground, or environment emitted an unknown beneficial form of radiation. A breathing method tuned to the correct personal frequency allowed the human body to absorb it. Knights did not understand the scientific mechanism. Noble families had simply passed successful rhythms down as guarded traditions. What they called bloodline talent might only describe how easily descendants reproduced similar biological frequencies. Luolan had cracked the central mystery of Knight's strength. The discovery created an even darker possibility. He wondered whether this world might also be connected to nuclear destruction. Half a year passed. Luolan completed his first full year in the army. The frightened recruits of winter had become disciplined soldiers. Their boots struck the ground together and their hands no longer trembled around spear shafts. Daily work shifted toward patrols, regional security, and maintaining the barracks. During harvest, soldiers exchanged spears for sickles and helped local farmers. Extra meat and ale rewarded the labor. Year-end celebrations brought shorter training sessions and rotating leave. Roasted meats, sweet bread, wrestling songs, and simple games filled the camp. Luolan used his reliable reputation to leave alone. Deep in an empty forest, he prepared to test the result of months of secret practice. His breathing settled into perfect rhythm. Luolan drove his foot against the ground. Rock cracked beneath the force. His body launched forward and his fist struck a thick beech tree. The trunk snapped. Luolan remained standing with calm breath, while sweat darkened his shirt. Model 0 measured his physical rating at 8. He had reached mid-night level. Only Viscount Rot possessed comparable strength in the territory. Rot had trained for more than 2 decades to reach that point. Luolan had done it within a single year. Discovery would make the nobles either terrified or murderous. A former serf reaching midnight strength threatened the mythology supporting noble privilege. Some might invent secret noble ancestry to explain him. Others would simply kill the proof that their hierarchy was based on incomplete knowledge. A midnight remained too weak to challenge the entire noble class alone. High night strength could change that calculation. Luolan remembered the half-dead boy in the Bandit cave. That frozen body and his current one barely seemed connected. Model 0 had completely rebuilt the breathing method after discovering the critical frequency. Traditional techniques improved nutrition, hormones, and physical training. Rare moments of perfect rhythm allowed the body to absorb beneficial radiation. The ideal frequency differed between individuals. Ordinary practitioners had to discover it through sensation and luck. One night might accidentally reach the correct rhythm every few months. An unfortunate practitioner could train for a year without triggering absorption once. True geniuses remembered the sensation and gradually learned to approach it more consistently. Nobles misunderstood those differences as evidence of stronger or weaker bloodlines. Model 0 eliminated guesswork. Luolan could target his exact frequency during every practice session. Where knights absorbed radiation rarely, he could attempt the process several times a day. Even his method had limits. Correct frequencies sometimes produced no effect when environmental particle concentration was too low. Each successful absorption also produced smaller gains as Luolan became stronger. Otherwise, his rating would already have risen far beyond 8. Luolan improved the physical training side of the technique as well. Traditional knights swung heavy weapons, lifted stones, ran long distances, and hardened themselves through impact. Their methods emphasized strength, endurance, and durability. Luolan added modern combat science and martial arts principles from his previous lives. During his years as a smuggler, he had learned hand-to-hand fighting for survival. Guns did not exist here, but knowledge of biomechanics remained useful. Luolan rejected mystical explanations for martial arts. Effective fighting was a system of strength, speed, structure, and technique. External methods developed limbs and direct combat movement. Internal methods trained the body to use interconnected muscles and organs more efficiently. Human biology was already an extraordinary machine. Understanding that machine mattered more than dramatic names or ceremonial movements. Luolan studied how animals transferred force through their entire bodies. A tiger's spine coiled and released like a bow during movement. Human ancestors had once possessed similar structural advantages before evolving upright posture. Standing on 2 legs freed the hands and supported tool use. It also changed the spine from a horizontal bridge into a vertical column. Modern humans paid for that adaptation with structural weaknesses and inefficient force transfer. Luolan used Model 0 to analyze how muscles, bones, and connective tissue could compensate. His training rebuilt movement chains through the feet, hips, spine, shoulders, and arms. A punch no longer came only from the fist. The entire body delivered force together. Knights in this world had enough physical capacity for those small improvements to become terrifying. Against an ordinary human, refined technique mattered less than a spear or a bullet. Against another superhuman, every fraction of efficiency could decide survival. Luolan continued refining his body while hiding beneath the identity of an excellent common soldier. His apparent military career remained almost boring. Patrols, training guard duty, and seasonal work filled his days. Beneath that routine, Model 0 was quietly creating a combat method no noble family possessed. Luolan trained joints to distribute impact. He strengthened vulnerable muscles around his spine. Breathing rhythms were adjusted for different levels of movement and fatigue. Every practice session generated data. Every piece of data returned as a better technique. Time became Luolan's greatest ally. The barracks saw a dependable veteran. Model Zero saw a biological weapon under continuous development. Eventually, Luolan's duties brought him closer to the realities of noble warfare. Standing armies existed because territorial peace never lasted. Lords fought over fields, rivers, mines, roads, and inheritance claims. Common soldiers became the bodies that converted noble arguments into blood. Luolan understood that his hidden strength could not remain theoretical forever. Real combat would eventually test every calculation. The world soon provided that test. Reports of an enormous beast began circulating through the territory. Ordinary hunters described destruction too great for a normal animal. Tracks crossed swamps and forests with impossible depth. Villages feared the creature would move toward settled farmland. Nobles could not ignore a monster capable of destroying soldiers and valuable land. Forces gathered for a major hunt. Luolan joined soldiers marching beneath noble banners. The operation exposed him to equipment and warriors far beyond the Grey Rock barracks. Knights arrived wearing heavy armor built for bodies several times stronger than ordinary men. Their weapons looked ridiculous until Model Zero measured the people carrying them. One armored fighter's equipment alone weighed more than many adult humans. Knee plates served as shields and battering surfaces. Model Zero measured one suit at roughly 120 pounds. Its wearer possessed a physical rating near 6.7 and moved without visible difficulty. The man's greatsword was even more frightening. It stood nearly 6 feet long and weighed around 45 kilograms. A dark gold blade stretched beyond 4 feet. One edge was polished for cutting, while the opposite side carried serrations. The reinforced tip had been designed to penetrate armor. Luolan privately admitted the warrior looked like something from an extravagant game cinematic. Yet every dramatic piece of equipment served a practical purpose. When superhuman bodies entered war weapons had to become superhuman as well. The hunt moved into dangerous terrain. Mud water and rotting vegetation turned the swamp into an enemy before the beast even appeared. Soldiers organized archers, infantry, siege equipment, and knights around a coordinated plan. The creature they faced was an enormous bear. Its body dwarfed ordinary animals and carried strength beyond low-ranked knights. Arrows struck its hide like rain. Catapults launched chained anchor hooks toward its limbs. Infantry locked heavy shields and advanced behind a forest of spears. The bear roared and charged. Anchor chains wrapped its legs while arrows continued striking. The creature barely seemed to care. It thrashed through mud and redirected itself toward the archers. Each step left deep craters in the swamp. Soldiers too slow to escape disappeared beneath its feet. Human formations that looked powerful from a distance became fragile beside the monster. Nobles shouted orders while specialized teams tried to create openings. Knights moved where ordinary infantry could not survive. The battle became a contest between preparation and overwhelming biology. Chains pulled. Spears pressed. Heavy weapons cut into joints and vulnerable areas. Luolan watched every movement through Model Zero. The nanomachines measured force speed armor and physical ratings. This was more than a hunt for him. It was a living laboratory filled with the strongest warriors he had ever seen. Low knights risked their lives to restrain the bear for only seconds. 13 of them were thrown away like broken toys when the creature exploded from the chains. Some slammed into rocks with shattered armor and bones. Others became tangled in chains and vanished beneath the swamp. 3 seconds of restraint had cost multiple noble warriors their lives. Those 3 seconds allowed midnights to damage the bear's joints. They came heartbreakingly close to severing both feet. One more second might have brought the monster down. The bear refused to give them that second. Viscount Rott's anguish echoed across the battlefield. The operation had been planned around coordinated timing. Once the restraint failed, every surviving group faced immediate danger. The bear's wounded joints bled, but its tendons still held. Rage made the creature even more violent. Luolan's calculations shifted constantly. Model Zero predicted movements and identified structural weaknesses faster than human commanders could respond. Yet Luolan still guarded his true strength. Revealing midnight power as a common veteran would create questions more dangerous than the bear. He fought only when circumstances forced him to move. The battlefield began separating survivors from men who had simply been lucky during training. Weapons broke. Armor failed. Mud swallowed the wounded. Luolan saw exactly how little noble titles mattered once a larger predator entered the field. The bear did not care about bloodlines. It responded only to force. That brutal simplicity matched Luolan's view of the world. Model Zero kept recording. Every night became a data point. Every wound revealed how enhanced tissue responded to impact. Every failed attack exposed inefficient movement. Luolan survived while learning from men who were dying around him. The experience changed his understanding of night combat. Physical ratings alone did not decide everything. Equipment terrain cooperation and reaction speed could multiply or destroy raw strength. A lower-rated fighter with the correct opening could still kill someone stronger. Luolan possessed the greatest opening detector in this world. Model Zero could read muscular tension before a strike. The nanomachines could also repair damage that would cripple other fighters. He began understanding how terrifying his complete advantage might become. A knight relied on a powerful body. Luolan possessed a powerful body, predictive processing, biological repair, and perfect data retention. His greatest enemy was no longer lack of potential. It was exposure. The monster hunt eventually became part of a larger sequence of conflicts. Luolan encountered nobles who measured every person by ancestry. Knightly families guarded techniques as if common knowledge would destroy civilization. In reality, common knowledge might destroy their political monopoly. Luolan understood why the breathing method was protected with execution. Nobles were not merely guarding combat secrets. They were guarding the explanation for why society accepted their rule. A peasant who believed noble bodies were naturally superior was easier to control. A peasant who knew the correct training frequency might become a revolutionary. Luolan had no intention of becoming a martyr for commoners. 3 lifetimes had removed most romantic ideas about sacrificing himself for strangers. He wanted survival freedom and enough strength that nobody could drag him into another cave. That goal required patience. Luolan continued wearing the face of a disciplined soldier. He respected officers publicly and avoided unnecessary disputes. Behind closed doors, Model Zero expanded its databases. Nanomachines recorded weapons armor, anatomy, breathing rhythms, and combat techniques. Luolan combined centuries of crude knight tradition with knowledge from modern worlds. His methods became less recognizable with every improvement. Eventually, the difference emerged during direct combat against powerful human opponents. Luolan faced warriors who believed superior ratings guaranteed victory. One of those enemies was Falman. Falman's weapon and physical power should have overwhelmed an ordinary soldier instantly. Luolan's armor was not extraordinary. Without predictive combat assistance, enemy blades would have cut him apart. Luolan needed one opening. Instead of waiting for it, he created one. His sword deliberately slowed by a fraction. Luolan dropped his left shoulder and exposed his chest. To Falman, the movement looked like exhaustion, producing a fatal mistake. The enemy's eyes brightened. Falman drove his axe directly into the opening. Steel cut through Luolan's armor and opened his chest. Blood sprayed across the battlefield. Falman believed the fight had ended. He pressed forward to split Luolan completely. Model Zero had already calculated the exchange. Luolan accepted the chest wound because nanomachines could repair it. Falman could not repair a severed neck. Luolan's counterattack flashed through the opening created by the axe. Falman's world turned upside down. For one final instant, he saw his own headless body. Blood erupted from the neck before his awareness disappeared. Luolan had traded a repairable injury for a guaranteed killing position. No traditional knight would willingly make that calculation. Their bodies were strong, but blood loss and organ damage remained deadly. Model Zero allowed Luolan to use his own flesh as bait. That advantage made his combat style increasingly difficult to understand. Enemies saw openings that were actually traps. They celebrated wounds that Model Zero was already closing. By the time they recognized the pattern, many had already lost the ability to move. Luolan's reputation began changing. Some soldiers still remembered the reliable former serf from Grey Rock. Others saw a frightening fighter whose calmness remained unchanged while blood covered his body. Luolan never corrected either image. Misunderstanding was useful protection. The more witnesses invented explanations, the less likely they were to discover the truth. Noble conflicts continued spreading around him. Families blamed defeats on commanders' roads, monsters, or common soldiers. Survivors protected themselves with carefully rehearsed stories. Luolan watched nobles manipulate responsibility as naturally as soldiers cleaned weapons. One group around Marcus and Eric prepared excuses for a disastrous camp. They planned to claim they had risked their lives covering comrades. Looting would be blamed on ordinary troops. Each man calculated which version of events might save him when his family arrived. Hoofbeats eventually announced 5 armored riders. Silver equipment carried the Wimber family crest. Terrified survivors welcomed the knights as though salvation had entered the valley. Luolan understood that noble rescue often came with interrogation, punishment, and political calculation. Every family protected its own prestige first. Truth mattered only when it supported authority. The deeper Luolan moved through noble society, the clearer that pattern became. Strength created status. Status protected access to greater strength. Breathing methods kept the cycle inside chosen families. Luolan existed outside that cycle. Model Zero had allowed a former serf to steal the mechanism without a teacher. His improved method also developed faster than noble traditions could match. The old hierarchy had no category for someone like him. Luolan therefore refused to give it a reason to invent one prematurely. New dangers eventually revealed another layer of the world. Knights were not the only beings capable of violating normal human limits. A man named Glacius demonstrated power that had nothing to do with an ordinary sword. In a cave filled with violence and invisible force destroyed bodies with casual brutality. Oro initially responded with anger over his son. Then he understood what he was facing. Glacius was a caster. Every trace of Oro's rage vanished. Knights, even the strongest knights, were still mortal in his mind. Casters belonged to another category entirely. Oro abandoned revenge and ran. He wanted only one more second of life. Glacius raised a hand. Invisible force struck Oro's back like a battering ram. The knight flew across the cavern and crashed into rock. Bones broke loudly enough to echo through the cave. Blood poured from his mouth. The encounter confirmed that Luolan's world contained powers even noble knights feared. His earlier suspicion about hidden systems had been correct. Breathing methods and biological radiation explained knights. They did not automatically explain casters. Luolan's need for data became even more urgent. The absence of churches and gods in the inherited memories now felt less like an irrelevant curiosity. Entire pieces of this world's history might be hidden from ordinary people. Serfs knew farmland, soldiers knew territory. Nobles knew breathing methods. Somewhere above them, other people clearly possessed knowledge of casters and stranger forces. Luolan recognized the familiar shape of controlled information. Waterblue Star had hidden Model Zero behind military secrecy. Noble families hid breathing techniques behind bloodline myths. This world might be hiding its greatest truths behind fear. Luolan had survived 3 lives by noticing what powerful people wanted others to ignore. He continued moving forward without exposing his conclusions. Every new opponent became another measurement. Model Zero's internal combat database expanded continuously. Luolan analyzed how different physical ratings affected muscle density and bone structure. He studied the influence of armor weight on acceleration. He recorded how enhanced warriors transferred force into oversized weapons. Traditional techniques were copied, compared, and stripped of unnecessary movements. Anything decorative disappeared. Anything that increased survival remained. Luolan's combat logic became brutally efficient. Attack and defense were no longer separate ideas. A block existed to create a killing angle. A wound could become bait. Retreat could force an enemy into predictable movement. Even apparent exhaustion could be manufactured. Model Zero predicted possibilities faster than ordinary fighters could consciously plan. Luolan still had to move his own body. That meant his physical capacity needed to continue growing. Breathing frequency training remained the foundation. Unknown radiation particles entered him whenever environmental conditions and rhythm aligned. Model Zero monitored every exposure for side effects. The nanomachines repaired microscopic damage and optimized adaptation. Luolan pushed beyond the level he once considered impossible. Midnight strength stopped being his ceiling. High night territory came within reach. His body became denser without turning bulky. Bones developed structures capable of surviving enormous forces. Muscles behaved like tightly organized cables beneath the skin. Tendons stored and released explosive energy. Model Zero coordinated those systems with machine precision. The half-dead serf had become a creature his former captors would not have recognized. Yet Luolan still remembered the cave. He remembered Scarface's club and the serfs who lacked enough strength to fight over food. Those memories did not make him sentimental. They made him practical. Power was not beautiful when a man was starving. Freedom was not philosophical when another person could legally own his labor. Luolan wanted strength because he had experienced life without it too many times. His first world had been peaceful until ordinary death eventually claimed everything. His second world taught him that civilization could become ash beneath falling bombs. His third world placed him inside a dead serf's body. No government noble or miracle had saved him. A smuggled black box and one desperate decision had done that. Luolan therefore trusted preparation more than promises. Model Zero became the perfect partner for that belief. Nanomachines never praised him. They never cared about noble blood. Data entered, calculations followed, and results appeared. Luolan found that honesty refreshing. As his strength rose, ordinary training became increasingly useless. Barracks exercises could maintain discipline, but no longer challenge his body. Fighting low-level soldiers provided almost no physical stimulus. Luolan needed opponents capable of forcing complete effort. Real high-ranked enemies were too dangerous to seek casually. Killing nobles for practice would also attract armies and political retaliation. Model Zero offered another solution. Its accumulated scans contained detailed anatomical and movement records. Luolan could use those records to construct simulated opponents. The system generated combat environments inside his awareness. Light movement distance and attack patterns could be modeled. Simulated enemies did not possess real minds. They followed combat logic built from collected data. That limitation still made them useful. Luolan could face weapons and attack patterns repeatedly without exposing his secrets. He began with manageable opponents. The first simulations tested footwork and reaction timing. Luolan allowed Model Zero to increase speed and aggression. Every failure became data. Every successful defense was tested again from a different angle. Movements that worked only under perfect conditions were discarded. Luolan wanted techniques that survived mud fatigue wounds and surprise. His previous experience with real battle shaped those standards. A beautiful sword form meant nothing if a crowded formation prevented the blade from moving. A perfect stance meant nothing after an enemy cut the supporting leg. Techniques had to adapt. Model Zero therefore generated random weapons and unpredictable combinations. Luolan fought swords, axes, spears, and oversized night weapons. Some enemies attacked alone. Others formed groups. The simulation slowly became more violent. Luolan encouraged that escalation. Combat mode read simulated muscle signals just as it read living opponents. His brain learned to process danger at extraordinary speed. The body followed those decisions until movement became instinctive. Months of training changed Luolan's understanding of combat again. He stopped thinking in named techniques. There was no sacred first form or final form. Each movement existed because of distance, angle, weapon, and available force. A sword pommel could become a striking weapon. A failed cut could reverse into another attack. An enemy's weapon might be redirected into his companion. Luolan treated bodies and weapons as changing geometry. Model Zero calculated the geometry continuously. His hands began acting before conscious language formed in his mind. That speed was the true purpose of repetition. Eventually, simulated low knights became too slow. Luolan increased their ratings. Stronger enemies forced him to respect reach and weapon mass. A giant blade did not need to touch his body cleanly to cause damage. Shock and displaced force could still break bones. Model Zero adjusted defensive movements. Luolan learned to redirect rather than absorb. He attacked joints during large weapon swings. He targeted breathing interruptions and balance changes. The system identified tiny intervals when enhanced muscles transitioned between contractions. Luolan built his attacks around those intervals. His combat style became almost invisible in its simplicity. An observer might see only a step, a short turn, and one sword movement. Model Zero saw hundreds of calculations behind those actions. Luolan's physical rating continued climbing. Eventually, it reached 14.5. That number placed him beyond the commonly described high knight standard. The former serf had entered a level ordinary nobles considered almost legendary. Luolan still trained in secrecy. Public recognition offered less value than hidden strength. A title could be taken away. A body capable of crushing the person taking it was harder to confiscate. Luolan tested his new level against simulated elite opponents. 10 dangerous fighters entered one exercise. Their combined pressure should have threatened almost anyone in this world. Luolan drew his weapon. The first attacker entered range. Luolan's pommel shot into the man's throat. His sword reversed during the same motion and removed another attacker's arm at the elbow. 2 enemies pressed from opposing angles. Luolan stepped forward rather than retreating. His greatsword swept horizontally through both lines of attack. No elaborate forms guided him. Pure attack and defense logic controlled every movement. Luolan moved through simulated opponents like a machine designed for battlefield survival. Model Zero predicted attacks. His enhanced body supplied overwhelming force. Refined movement prevented that force from being wasted. One enemy fell, then another. Luolan repositioned before surrounding weapons could close. The remaining fighters tried to attack together. Their intentions appeared in muscle tension and weapon angles before their strikes completed. Luolan entered the weakest section of their formation. His weapon turned a coordinated attack into obstruction. Enemies blocked one another. Model Zero highlighted killing paths. Luolan followed them without hesitation. 15 seconds later, all 10 simulated opponents were down. Not one had touched him. 10 warriors who should have ranked among this world's most dangerous fighters had failed to produce a meaningful injury. Luolan examined the result without celebrating. Model 0 reported no increase in physical rating. The difficulty no longer provided sufficient growth stimulus. Luolan understood what that meant. He had adapted to threats that would once have terrified him. The body responded to new levels of combat intensity with small but measurable improvements. Once Luolan completely adapted, the stimulus disappeared. He needed greater danger. Blood still pumped quickly from the exercise. His awareness remained sharpened by the final exchanges. A strange rush of relief spread through him like floodgates opening. Luolan finally understood the battle-crazed warriors from stories he once considered ridiculous. Full-intensity combat genuinely felt incredible. For most of his lives, fighting had been a desperate tool for survival. Now his body had become powerful enough to experience battle differently. That realization did not make Luolan careless. He knew pleasure could become another weakness. Model 0 existed to measure facts, not excitement. The facts were simple. 10 elite simulated opponents had become insufficient. Luolan considered the problem. Increasing enemy numbers would test crowd management. Raising physical ratings would test speed force and reaction limits. He wanted a challenge capable of exposing weaknesses in every part of his system. The answer produced a flicker of anticipation. Luolan ordered Model 0 to generate 10 new opponents. This time, every opponent would possess a physical rating identical to his own. Each would stand at 14.5. Weapons would be randomized. Attack patterns would not be restricted. The simulation would operate in full kill mode. Luolan allowed no artificial mercy. Model 0 began generating the battlefield. The air inside his simulated awareness seemed to grow heavy. Light and shadow shifted. One figure appeared, then another. 10 bodies completed formation around Luolan. Every figure matched his height. Every figure carried his build. The same crushing physical potential radiated from each simulated opponent. Luolan was no longer looking at inferior warriors. He was looking into 10 lethal mirrors. Each mirror possessed enough strength to tear ordinary knights apart. Model 0 confirmed that ordinary simulated enemies could no longer push Luolan's body into meaningful growth. The thrill of full-intensity combat had become a language his nerves, muscles, and nanomachines understood perfectly. So Luolan ordered 10 opponents with physical ratings identical to his own, each armed at random and authorized to kill. 10 mirror-like figures formed around him, carrying the same crushing strength and the same lethal potential he possessed. Luolan raised his weapon as the final simulation locked into full-power combat mode. Luolan stood without fear before 10 versions of himself, fully accepting that the only wall left to conquer was the strength he had created.